That's better. Yeah, live 929. I'm getting ready to take a trip to SoCal, see my buddies at West Tech, do another dyno run on the truck, make sure that the NA stuff is still there and everything's working. And then possibly while I'm down there, we maybe try to figure out what's going on with the blower thing again. I'm going to make a new inlet system for the blower. The other one was because it had a silicone coupler joining two tubes. I tried to stick the tubes in far enough where they were almost touching, but it was still collapsing a little bit because that silicone coupler was behind the throttle body. So under vacuum, when the throttle's closed, there's a lot of vacuum there and it wants to close that up. But when you go to wide open throttle, there's not vacuum there anymore, or at least very, very little, probably very little in that tubing, since that's tubing is 3.5 inches and the inlet going into the blower is less than 3 inches. So if there's a restriction anywhere, it's there in the blower after that, basically after that opening, because the throttle body is bigger than that. All of the inlet tubing is bigger than that. The mass here is bigger than that. So I don't think that inlet would be restrictive, and also not at this power level. I mean, we were making, a little more than stock power, let's say. So that wasn't a problem, but it was collapsing when we're under idle. And I actually want to make it so the next time I put the blower on the truck, I'm going to make it so that it can drive around, so the hood can close and all that stuff. So it can, it could be real world. Besides, I want to put the throttle body actually on the other side, not on the side of the blower that we had it on. It made it easy. Again, a lot of times when I'm doing this, I have lots of tubing in my collection, and I try to make it with tubing that I have that I don't have to cut anything. Because just like with this test, the test, the way that we configure it for that test is never permanent. At least this one wasn't. I would kind of now like to make it as a permanent thing. So not that that's going to stay on there forever, but I'd like it to be able to go on and work on a stock application, so I could take a little bit more time. When I was down there last time, we had a limited amount of time, limited amount available time. We had a limited window basically of available dyno time, so I had to fit it in there. And when you're trying to do 8 different things, also doing chassis and doing all kinds of running around, building things and stuff, it's a lot for a kind of a one-man show. But hopefully we'll get that solved and we'll get it running. I'll do the coil test on it, and we'll try a couple of different things. I also have my 255 pump that I got from Summit, that I bought from Summit. So I'm going to put that in, and that won't change anything, driving around, even when the thing is NA. So we'll just have more than enough fuel pump to make that work. So that'll be good. And I'm excited about that, and we can run that. I'm also going down to see a bunch of buddies down there, Chad and everybody, for the MPMC conference, which will be great to get together with guys that, a lot of times I only get to talk to on the phone and stuff. So when we get together, nonsense ensues, but it'll be good to see everybody. Today, actually, I want to talk about the thumbnail photo that I have up is a long runner, longish header design that I ran on a B series Honda test, that way back when we were running the motor that I had done for Bonneville, that we set all the records with. Well, one version of the ones that we set a bunch of records with. We ran a big 76 millimeter turbo, that one of the two that at the time Mahovitz had run on his 4.6, because he was making 1 million horsepower, and we wanted to make 500,000 with the Civic, and he allowed me to use that turbo. We never ran that turbo at Bonneville. We ran a much smaller turbo. I think we ran a 72 millimeter turbo, which still is pretty good size for what we were doing. But it was, I think that the one that we set the records in was a Turbonetics turbo, and it worked very well. But again, we never ran the thing up. I mean, even when the thing went 227 at the 4 mile marker, I think we were only running 17 pounds or something. It was not very much, and not a lot of timing. What I really wanted to do is run this thing with 20 pounds of boost and 20 degrees of timing. Then it would have, and there was more available. I mean, there was certainly more turbo there. So that thing could have gone, famous last words, there's a lot left. But the thumbnail photo I have is when we ran that turbo that Mahovitz allowed me to borrow. We did this only because it made things easier. So we made basically a header configuration off of that B series flange that just went straight, and then they just went straight into basically into a 4-into-1. In this case, it was a T4 flange. And we use that, but not out of design or anything, just more out of, hey, this is easy to make. We know that it will work, and it's going to be the quickest, because it's a temporary exhaust manifold that we were making just for the dyno test. And so that one ended up making 700 and, I don't know, 20 or 30 horsepower at, I think we ran like 29 pounds on that thing. And I don't remember talking to Mahovitz about I don't ever remember looking up a compressor map for that turbo to see where we were. I know that he has run fairly high pressure ratios on that 4.6. And so I kind of assumed that we had a pretty efficient, 2-liter motor, and that we would be close to where he was with a larger 4.6. And because he was running 2 of those and running lots of boosts, and I figured it all worked out. and it kind of did. But the question becomes, and I honestly, so guys know, if you don't want to stick around for the whole video, I don't have a definitive answer for whether or not long tube headers make more power than short exhaust manifolds do on a turbo application. But we're going to talk about why, and we're going to talk about a couple of different theories. And we know, for guys that don't understand, when you run a long tube header, let's forget about the turbo for a second. When you run a long tube header, you get a scavenging effect. What that means is there are pressure waves. It's not that the turbo flows better. Like a long tube exhaust or a long tube header might not actually flow better than a short one does. Because if you made the primary diameter, if you ran 1 3/4 shorty headers and 1 3/4 long tube headers, depending on what you did with the collector, the shorty headers might flow more because they're shorter. The exhaust has less surface friction because they're shorter. And so you can have a shorty set, just like you can have a short runner intake manifold that flows more than a long runner intake manifold. But the long runner intake manifold, long being a relative term, makes more power through most of the curve. And it doesn't do that because of flow. And the headers don't work headers work the same way. They don't do that because of flow. Long tube headers produce a scavenging effect. So you have reflected waves that come back up and help actually draw exhaust out, and more importantly for this, draw charge air in. So those waves are happening, and that's the scavenging effect. And there are a variety of different ones that we could talk about, but that's happening with a long tube header. So it happens when the thing is NA. But I don't know whether that's still happening or whether it's as effective when you put a turbo on the end of the header, because things have to happen for these scavenging waves to be effective. And if you cap that exhaust, I don't know that you allow this reflection to happen. I think you do, and I'd like to see. In fact, it's one of the things I'd like to interview Tom Nelson and see if he's done any testing with that, and maybe interview a couple of other guys that would have actually tested this. Not guys that run a specific, because the difference between somebody who's tested it and somebody who hasn't tested it, and there's lots of guys who haven't tested it that have lots of ideas about it. Those aren't the guys that I want to talk to. I mean, I would still talk to them and I would still listen to them. But what I want is a guy who's done a definitive test. So until I do that, I want to talk to somebody else who's actually done that and talk to them about their dyno test and their results and go, look, we ran this combination with stock exhaust manifolds or shorty exhaust manifolds and ran this turbo and kept the airfield at 11.5 and kept the timing at 20 degrees and kept the intercooler temperature the same. And we ran this and ran this boost level, and it did this. And then we put the long tube headers on, and then it did this. Here are some of the problems with that. One, if long tube headers do on turbo applications do what they do on NA applications, we might see a couple of different things. One, we might see a more boost response. So like on engine dyno, we're going to see less of that because of the way that we load the motor. I mean, we do a stationary load on it and get the thing up to where the power stabilizes, and then we release it and it goes. That doesn't tell you a whole bunch about what happens with boost response. Boost response is really good to be tested. Like on a chassis dyno, works fairly well as long as you can control all of the variables. Again, that's a difficult thing. Or out on the street, can you make it better? Is the boost response better? A lot of guys that do a ton of data logging on their drag race cars, this sort of thing is very beneficial. But again, here's another problem with doing that at the drag strip, is that a lot of guys that are running stuff at the drag strip might have a high enough stall converter where the gains that you get from a long tube header start to diminish compared to the shorty header. It has the stall converter absorb most of that area, most of that gain area. You know, these are all things that you have to look at. You know, if we talk about the turbo, you know, limiting flow, did our long tube headers somehow flow less than the shorty headers did? You know, there's a lot of things, a lot of things to talk about here. And also, is there enough gain in the range that we're talking about with that particular turbo? If you have an 800 horsepower turbo on there and you're making 800 horsepower, well, you're probably doing all that you can. The only way to make more power would be to adjust where the turbo is on the map or reduce back pressure. You know, then you're adjusting kind of something else. There's a lot of stuff here. I can tell you that every professional form of motorsports uses, you know, if you look at the IndyCar stuff and when Formula One's using turbos, if you look at all of those and look at what they're doing with their design, they're pretty good about the way that they design their exhaust manifolds. They're not using some guys would use a cast thing or Inconel or something because they're worried about longevity. So Le Mans would be a good example of that. If they're running turbo motors in Le Mans, making the power is one thing, but you got to make it for 24 hours, and you got to go through a bajillion heat cycles with this thing as they're going through all the gears on one lap, and then you got to go do that for 24 hours. So having the thing last is also a critical element. So a lot of the design features are more about doing the other things that they have to do for Formula One or IndyCar or whatever. Packaging is a big thing. You know, the aero signature of the engine as part of the rest of the car, all of that stuff. You know, it's kind of critical. But normally what they do is they have some sort of, you know, long tube header feeding usually they're directly feeding the wastegate and then turn, and then they feed then the turn up is for the turbo. You know, on an Indy car, like for the Indy 500, how interested are they in boost response? You know, where do they, you know, when they're running turbo stuff, how responsive do they want it to be? And then how much do they care about that response versus, you know, maximum power? Are they limited in the turbo size? Are they limited in boost? You know, what they're doing is a function of a lot of different things, and maybe not just the one thing that we want to look at when we're talking about this. I can tell you that when we run, having run lots and lots of primarily LS stuff, but I've run lots of other engine families. But on the turbo stuff on the LS, I can tell you that the tubular headers that we run, the forward-facing ones, seem to make more power than the stock truck manifolds do that we reverse and run those. Now, they'll make a lot of power. You know, you can go into 4-digit power levels with the truck manifolds. And obviously, they'll last forever because they're cast iron and they were designed by the OEMs to basically last indefinitely. I mean, you know, I've got 330,000 miles on mine, and you're more likely to break an exhaust manifold bolt or stud than you are for anything bad to happen to the exhaust manifolds themselves. Normally, guys get leaks in them because the bolt breaks and it's not securing the exhaust manifold. I don't think I've heard about too many guys cracking an exhaust manifold. I suppose it's possible, but using those for the turbo thing, you know, for longevity works really well. And it also works well for making power. We know because we've made lots of power with them. But and also the way that the turbos sound, they sound happier with the headers on. And I know that that's kind of a subjective thing and not an actual data point, but I can't help but think that the thing sounds a lot more pissed off when you're running the headers on it. But again, I do want to test that. I'd like to compare it. The other problem when you're doing this comparison, if you're doing a long tube header like this, and I want to test the ones that the guys from Holley make, because their headers have much better spark plug clearance, and you're not going to burn plugs or wires and that kind of stuff. So I want to test theirs, and theirs are similar to the cheap ones, but they have clearance, and so I want to test those. But I'd like to test those versus the truck manifolds. But again, the problem is you're going to have to change something else. The Y pipe for where those headers exit it has to be different than the one that you use for the stock exhaust manifolds. The opening size itself is different. If you look at the exit of a stock truck manifold, it's smaller than the collector size is, which is normally 3 inches on these things. The collector size is different than the opening or the exit of the truck manifold. That's another difference. That's not just long tube versus short tube. So when you change those and you do see some sort of difference, where do you start attributing that? And if you have a 3-inch exit on the header, do you make your Y pipe 3 inches? Do you make the Y pipe 3 inches for both of them? If you do, you have to step up the exit of the exhaust manifold, the truck exhaust manifolds, when you flip them around. And the Y pipe that I use, you'd have to step that up to make it 3 inches. Do you do that? Do you just make it 2.5? Guys want to see, hey, what's the difference between a 2.5 inch, Y pipe and a 3-inch Y pipe? I honestly don't think that I think you have to be at a fairly high horsepower level to see a difference there. And I don't think you'd see a dramatic change in response rate, because I don't think that thing is the thing that would be dictating response rate. And when you got to a point where that size was dictating a response rate, you have cured all the other problems that came before that. And most guys haven't done that. But that's what I'm talking about. It's when you do test this, and I do want to test it again. I'm going to test it on something. I'm going to try a tubular header or tubular headers on a V8 application versus stock exhaust manifolds, and just kind of see what it does. The other thing that happens is when you're testing something like this and you run the headers and then you run stock exhaust manifold or exhaust manifolds, and you do a comparison and you regulate the boost, regulating the boost is going to determine, you're going to determine the power output. So if you run 10 pounds on one and 10 pounds on the other, is it going to be the same just because you've made your combination make 10 pounds? So again, are we looking then for more of a response change? If the header helped NA, do we get that multiplied at 10 pounds under boost so we make more? Guys, let me know in the comments. What do you guys think? If the headers made more power NA, will that get multiplied under boost? Frosty cold beverage. Let me know. The torque storm seems to be loud. That supercharger seems to be loud. That seems to be odd. Ours, they make noise because they're spinning and they're a gear drive. So you will hear something. The Vortex were like that too, and Pro Chargers were like that too. The M90 makes noise. So let's start a poll. Long tube headers make more power than shorty. Yeah. So the poll is yes or no. Long tube headers make more power than shorty headers on a turbo motor. Since it's a yes or no poll, makes it fairly easy, right? Okay, let's see what YouTube. What's up? What's up? Beautiful day in South Carolina. Cool. Yesterday was beautiful. We took the dogs out for a run. We went over and visited with Lisa's parents to watch the football game. They're big 49er fans, so they were very happy with the outcome. Did not look good for those guys. Didn't look good for those guys at the beginning, but they came back, which was awesome. I'm just happy that we took all the stuff over to make tri-tip sliders. So that's kind of really what I cared about, which was awesome. Long tube headers versus shorties. In comparison between long tube headers versus shorties, at least on an NA application, long tube headers make more power. They make more low speed power, which a lot of guys for some reason think that shorty headers make low speed power. They don't. They're terrible for that. Shorty headers, in fact, very rarely make more power than stock exhaust manifolds do. Long tube headers almost always do. So of the three of those, stock exhaust manifolds, shorty headers, and long tube headers are the best. But do they do that under boost? Interviewing Nelson would be good. I agree. Tom, I've spoke to Tom a few times, and he's a really good guy, and he's done lots of cool stuff. So wanted to know the answer to this question for some time. If long tubes are good for NA, shouldn't they be good for turbo application? Andy, what's going on? Sorry if you answered this already, but so long tubes make more power than shorties on NA applications. Yes, every time. I have lots of long tube header tests up on all sorts of different engine families. So do you need a shorter intake and exhaust primary length to get the right resonance and the same RPM and boost? Shorter intake and exhaust. Let's look at them separately first. Short runner intake manifolds make more power at a higher RPM than long runners do on the intake. Same thing happens on the exhaust. Longer primaries make more power at a lower speed than shorter primaries do. And so if you wanted to team those together, the thing is that when you're looking at that, the range that you're talking about for a given runner length or primary length, the effective range that they're working at, is pretty broad. So it's not like, okay, at 7,100 RPM, I need this exact thing, because that's not what you're tuning it for. You're tuning it for a range, not just 1 RPM. Fixing to try the first startup, the fuel system installed. There you go. The torque storms seem to be loud. Yeah, we talked about that. My manifolds are cracked on my 93.57 Silverado. So 93.57, that's going to be what is that? That's not a throttle body injected one, is it? At 93? Would be cool to see the difference with all the different B series. I've done a lot of header tests on B series. And the one design that never did well, a lot of the other tri-Y stuff, depending on the primary diameter and where they merge them and stuff, a lot of the tri-Y stuff did good. A lot of the 4-1 stuff did good as long as the primary lengths were long. The ones that almost never did good were the shorty 4-1s, then into a common, what we call you can call it a collector or B pipe. The B pipe usually is after that collector, but they merge the 4-1 and then they have a tube that comes out of that. That design for the Honda stuff for the B series never did well. Do you need long tubes on a Silverado? Do you have a Silverado and you want to put long tubes on it? So turbo sensor, you're going to start it on the stand. You're going to do a stand start. That's awesome. I put headers on the D16 Integra. It felt like I lost bottom end. You may have compared to the factory exhaust manifold, but only because the factory tri-Y exhaust manifold on a Honda is already really good. and also it feeling like you did, and maybe you need to test it to see what it did. Almost thinking as the boost increases, the ideal RPM for a given length will decrease. No, pressure doesn't affect that. I put my 408 together. I'm going to prime the oil system today or tomorrow. I'm going to pull all the plugs and run the starter. There you go. That's what we do on the engine dyno. We'll on a not on an LS. I mean, on an LS, we crank it over with the dyno a lot of times. But before we do that, and if we do a Ford or a Chevy or whatever, we'll use a drill to prime it and spin the oil pump without spinning the motor over. So we'll spin the oil pump, and then what we do normally is, if it's a fresh motor, we'll make sure that we have oil to all the rockers, and we'll rotate the motor with a breaker bar by hand, and make sure that we have all the lifters are pumped up. We have oiling to the top of the motor, and that we have oil to every one of the rockers. Then we know oil is getting everywhere that it should. And then we will spin the motor over and try to start it. With the LSs on a brand new one, what I do is we put air pressure, we seal everything. We put air pressure to the dipstick tube and force only like a pound or a pound and a half or 2 pounds of air pressure. We force down into the crankcase, and that pushes the oil up into the pump. And once we start seeing pressure on the gauge that's hooked up to the oiling system, then we spin the motor over with the starter. And this dyno has 2 starters, so it spins it over fairly fast, a few hundred RPM. And usually the oil pump, and we've already made sure that when we put a new pump in, it has oil or grease or something that helps with a prime setup. And also when you're spinning the pump, it doesn't chew itself to death. Doing that system seems to have the oil pump, even a gerotor pump, which we have more problems with than you do with the pumps that are in a small block Ford, small block Chevy. On the LSs, when we pre-prime it like that, put a little bit of pressure in it, and then hit the starter, usually the thing catches right away. And when it's cranking over, we get 45 or so PSI just on the starter motor. And then once we see pressure like that, then we go ahead and we go, okay, now it's okay to start. Easiest pull ever. I never liked shorty headers on Fox Mustangs. Yeah, I didn't mind shorty headers only because on the Fox Mustangs, it actually didn't take a whole bunch of weight off. It normally does, because a lot of times if you're replacing cast iron exhaust manifolds like on an LS with tubular headers, it's less weight. So I like it for that. But a lot of times on the Fox Mustangs, especially with the equal length shorties, they were terrible for plug wires and stuff. 93 is a TBI. Okay. Hellcat and Elephants make 800 to 1,000 horsepower with SRT exhausts. Not headers. The SRT exhaust manifolds are essentially shorty headers. they're cast, but they're longer than, like, if you look at the Dodge Ram manifolds for the trucks, those are awful. Those are a big log manifold. And an SRT8 exhaust, those exhaust manifolds or exhaust headers, performance headers from the factory, make more power than the Dodge Ram stuff does. Richard, new to the group, watching you for the second time from Australia. Welcome. We welcome all of our Australian brethren home to King Brown Snakes. What header size do you like for B series? I think that ours were, I think on our turbo application, we ran 1 3/4. Love to stick around, but break's over. All right, go back to work, man. Have to test a new fuel pump at work. It's driven by 250 horsepower electric motor. Nice. 40,000 PSI. Yeah, keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle. Spin the pump with the drill. Rotate the engine on the old school stuff. Yeah, pin the pump with a drill. Lather, rinse, repeat. Yep. I might pull the plug on the side of the LSX block and funnel in a cord also. If here inside me is real, don't want to mess the thing up. That's always the scariest part. And especially when it doesn't pick up right away. Richard, high compression can cause damage to a piston ring or cylinder. High compression, high static compression, especially if you run it with stock cams, can cause detonation if you don't tune it properly. And so that's why most people don't like the factory stuff doesn't run high compression. High compression can be beneficial for adding power, but there's a balance between the amount of static compression you can run, whatever cam timing you're running, and then the available octane that you're trying to run. So you have to match all those things. Small blocks and big blocks are easy to prime with a drill. Yeah, that makes life easy. And then you can see what's going on usually. Like I said, if we take the valve covers off and then sometimes don't adjust the lash or the rockers until we have oil, till all of the lifters are primed. In fact, I don't think I've done that recently, but I also like to have the drill in there to adjust the lash if we're doing a hydraulic roller cam. I like to do it with the lifter pumped up. So we hit it with the drill and then I adjust it. The C5 Corvette stock exhaust manifolds have pretty long primary tubes. How's our poll doing? Yes or no? Long tube headers make more power than shorty headers on a turbo. So we've got 58% saying yes, 42% saying nope. My modded oil pan holds just under one full tanker. So you got a lot of oil capacity there. Do you know where you can get see-through valve covers? I don't know if somebody manufactures those or not. You could make them though. I was going to do that for the Dodge. The guys at the car farm gave me a steel, an older steel, like an NA valve cover. And what I wanted to do was cut the top of it off, weld on a flange, and then just put a piece of glass, or probably we would use like polished Lexan or something that we could see through. Just want to see what's going on. We just want to watch the oiling on the cam stuff. We did that. I did that video of watching the oil squirt on the camshaft while we were, because we were spinning the oil pump on that one. You can spin that external drive for the pump, and we could spin the cam around, and you could watch because the oil doesn't squirt between the lobe and the rocker all the time. It has an opening that comes around relative to where the cam is, and then continues to oil. It's pretty cool. I think equal length from both cylinders to the turbo is more important than overall runner length for power. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I could see wanting to even them out, but given the runner length and the change, I don't know. It would be really hard to get even runner lengths unless you were pretty fancy with the tubing, just because it depends on where you mount the turbo relative to its position of all the runners. So you have to get clever with the tubing. It's not impossible. Just Trigger Happy Customs. I have a set. Dude made them. Look up Odd Rod Machine. Cool. I have a hot rod oil pan and added 2.5 inches to the sump. It's now a $75 oil change. That's a lot. But more oil is better, but also having the oil away from the spinny stuff is also important. And you don't have to have more oil capacity if you've lowered the depth of that sump. All you have to do is lower the pickup. So you could still run the same 5 quarts or 7 quarts or whatever it was, and not have the pickup come unsubmerged. A clear timing chain cover would be awesome. Yep. I want a mod pan with 6-inch sump area next. Hopefully keep it under 10 quarts. The pans that seem to work best, like the ones that we won't run on the big block, are a big rectangular box that's deep, and also like the Moroso one that I like also incorporates a windage tray. But one of the most important things it incorporates is a kick out. So it's not just a square box that goes straight down. On one side, it goes down and then over and then down. So when the oil with the spinning crank and stuff, what happens is it gets the cyclone effect going in there and wants to whip the oil around. So if you have the oil that's whipping around, if you have it slosh up, and it's going to slosh up and hit an edge and then come back down and stop continuing to spin around and produce drag on the crank and also windage. And so you don't want that to happen. So a kick out pan is really beneficial. I'm going to make one for the Dodge for the 2.2. He used really high quality tall valve covers and makes plexiglass windows on the top. I had mine in a small block shape for years, 0 leaks. And for the dyno, I honestly wouldn't care if it leaked a little bit, as long as you could just look in there. One of the problems with looking in at the oiling system, because what I wanted to do is I wanted to do that for the oil pan. The oil pan would be way better to look at than the rockers, because we know the rockers are going to be going up and down, and we're going to be able to see that, and we're going to be able to see oil, coming up through the pushrod hole into the rocker, and that will be cool. Seeing the crank, what's going on with the crank, would be very, very cool. It's the Ford guys having dry start bearing issues. Why is the Ford more pronounced to that? Same boost. Yes, long tube headers can make slightly more if they're better constructed. I would like to see the dyno results where that's actually tested. Getting ready to do my first LS swap in a 72 C10. Can't decide on turbo or ProCharger, but I want to be able to drive it daily. Either one of those can be driven daily. The particular form of boost that you choose, whatever power adder you're choosing, is not going to affect drivability as long as the tune's correct. I've seen elbows collapse when making a dyno pull. It was an AMG, and Alex of LSC had to replace the couplers. If you're at wide open throttle, how does the coupler collapse? Where does the vacuum come from to make it collapse? Obviously, if it's on the pressure side, I've exploded them before because we put the cheap silicone couplers that are designed for an air intake system that has no pressure really, but we used them on the pressure side, and it expanded enough. It looked like a balloon, and then finally it'll either blow up if the clamps are tight enough, or it'll stretch out enough and just suck itself out from under the clamp, and then it will leak. On the inlet side, because we had ours, if you have it on the inlet side on the atmosphere side of the throttle body, that's not going to do anything. There's no vacuum there, or there would be very little vacuum there. There'd have to be something that would create vacuum there, a restriction in front of whatever that silicone coupler is. In our case, we had vacuum there because the coupler was between the throttle body and the blower. So that's why we have vacuum there. When the throttle blade's closed, you have whatever idle vacuum you have. That could be 15 inches or 20 inches. And on a hard D cell, you could have even more, because on a hard D cell, you'll have more vacuum present there. But the only thing that will make that coupler collapse at wide open throttle is if you have some kind of restriction that's causing that thing to collapse. Otherwise, it doesn't do that. 96 GM LQ1 is my project. Currently in process of removing the drivetrain. Third gear stopped pulling, so I'm swapping trans. I know it's not a V8 topic, but I thought I'd share my headache. What's James? You're free to talk about anything that you want, but what is an LQ1? Admiral, we know what the theories are. We talked about that earlier on before you were here. But again, I want to see the test results where that actually happened. Deep down inside, I think everyone loves a performance story. How do you not like a VTEC motor? I'm thinking making my long bed C30 a short bed instead of cutting the frame in the middle would be better to just move my leaf springs and axle forward than just cut off the rear frame only. I don't know which one of those would be more work. It is a fair bit, obviously cutting the center section out, but at least it's those are straight cuts though. And do you guys slide, if this is rectangular tubing, do they slide a tubing sec? Do they, have a little center section that they slide in there and then, cut the section off and join the two back together with an interior, rectangular piece and then seam weld the thing? Is that how they're doing it? GM LQ1 is a 3.4 liter double overhead cam front wheel drive. It's made from 90 to 97. Okay, so is that like the Grand Am motor then? Because I've oh no, the Grand Am motor was not, that wasn't a double overhead cam one though. Does high compression reduce piston ring useful life? No, not necessarily. Not all by itself. It doesn't do that. They made a double over cam 3.4 in the Grand Am. The twin dual cam, I'm familiar with those. We did some work on those way back too. We did extrude honing the intake manifold, the head. We did some headers for it, I think, way back in the day. It was pretty cool. We just didn't do cams, which the thing really needed. I started life in the two-door Lumina Z34. Yeah, if that's the twin dual cam that we're talking about, I'm pretty familiar with that. Winston, we were talking about whether or not long tube headers help with turbo stuff. Freiberger did a test at Westech on oil pans. Oil pans we've tested oilings. I did that test for my Engine Masters motor, and we've done other pan tests as well. Even for big block Chevys, we do even just a oil level test on a big block Chevy can be sizable amount of power, but an oil pan's worth quite a bit. All right, Scott, we'll see you. Let's see here. General Motors. $200 to 210 horsepower. Yeah, twin dual cam power. I think only piping diameter is better. Yeah, they offered that I know they offered it in the Lumina Z34 and then other ones too. I think the guys are saying the Monte Carlo and stuff. If it were me, I'd replace the 3.4-liter twin dual cam with something newer. For example, a high-value engine. Yeah, the later versions are obviously much more powerful. I mean, I think you could find versions of the V6 that are probably 100 horsepower up on that one. I think an LV3 or an LV1 is probably up almost 100 on that. And that's a big change. But doing a direct inject deal would kind of be a pain. When I was doing the Grand Prix stuff, the 3.8 liter supercharged stuff, one of the customers had one of those twin dual cams too, and he wanted to upgrade it. So he plans to throw a newer 4.3 on the dyno. We already have. There's already videos up on that. UGM Vortec 4.3 liter would be the way to go. Shorty headers in the turbo application perform the same if the diameter primary and collector is the same. Funds are tight. What you can do is you can. I think we also put a bigger throttle body on that. I think when we extrude honed the opening, because if I remember, I think the throttle body was in the manifold, was part of the manifold casting, and I think we machined that out and put a bigger blade on it. Quicker spool time, maybe we talked about all that. If they help low speed power, maybe they help with response. Are they even getting scavenging waves with the turbo being there at or near the, like, might we get reflected waves and scavenging waves if we had a little more distance between the end of the collector of the header and then the turbo, like we had another exhaust section? I tried to do that on the Honda, but didn't on the B series when I was testing it, but didn't really get a definitive answer there. An LZ9 3.9 liter, obviously bigger is better. I do want to do more 4.3 stuff, not the LV1 and LV3, which I also like, but more the earlier one, the Cyclone Typhoon one, like the one that Tony Angelo is doing. Apparently 7. Apparently it's only 3, if I remember the owl commercial. 1, 2, 3. That's it. Right? That's easy. Easy peasy. Easy breezy cover girl. So for February, I got lots of stuff I want to get done. Got to make goals. Then you got to work to achieve those goals. So I got some cool videos I want to get done in February. Got to test the ported manifolds for the ported blower housings. Got a small block Chevy I want to run. Got a, and this probably won't happen until the end of February, but I got a top secret new product that nobody has ever seen in the history of the world. My dog is popping bubble wrap. That's great. Camaro, do you need any help, Richard? Any help to do what? I want to run the 4.3 liter, the earlier V6s, because I want to put an M90 on one of those 4.3 liters. I got to run the Pontiac stuff, the Trophy 4, and the Trophy 8, both of them. The All Pontiac Hour, All Pontiac Performance Hour. I think Bruno's here. Oh yeah. Yeah, he's laying right outside the door. He's protecting me. He's on guard duty. Well, sleeping on guard duty. I like to see the Typhoon 4.3 on the dyno. A good friend of mine has a Cyclone. Worked on it. It's a neat setup. It is cool. I don't know that I would run the factory turbo setup on those. Although the guys at Westech had one of those there, I think, for a long time. I don't know whose it was though. But we didn't ever run it. I just want to get a 4.3 liter, a 200 horsepower 4.3 liter out of the wrecking yard, and then we'll put some kind of blower on there, some kind of manifold adapter thing or whatever. Because it should be a good combination for the 4.3 liter. I mean, the Grand Prix is the 3800 is a 200 horsepower motor NA, and so the supercharged version should be that M90 should be perfect for the 4.3 liter. Something I've never done before. Anyone got a lower crossfire intake to slap an M90 on for a small block? Yeah, that would be cool. It definitely would be other guys, right? But you'd almost, to do it right, you really have to put 2 of them on there because it's, it's got 2 openings. But no, making a plate for that would be fairly easy. The problem for that is it would be really, really specialized because you're not going to find a lot of those running around. Vortec 4.3 liter intake would be an easy intake to make an adapter plate for. You've got the spider injectors out of it. Oh, I think you could use, couldn't you use it's expensive, but couldn't you use the marine one? How's the truck coming along with the M90? Well, it doesn't have the M90 on there. It's just all back to stock right now, just driving it around. We're gonna revisit that, obviously. Because we want that to work. I kind of want to see what it does on a stock truck. 7 pounds on a stock truck, I'm thinking we should be 350 at the tire or something. The TD 2.2, 2.5 suppliers advertise 20% more flow with their stock ported exhaust manifold, so it changed other things with adding the manifold, but the engine did feel like it more low end torque. Are those turbo diesel things that you're talking about? And a ported manifold would definitely flow more than a stock manifold. 25% is a lot of flow. I don't know how they increased it that much unless the stock one was really bad to begin with. They got them on eBay for $200. The whole top splits. On the are you talking about the L83 the crossfire manifolds, or are you talking about the V6 ones? Looks like you're missing intake manifold gaskets. No, that was a common comment from people that don't realize that the low ram intake manifold has O-rings on it, on the underside of it, that slip in just like an LS does. And then when you put the manifold on, the gaskets are in the manifold and it goes on and seals against the head. So a sprint boat with 8-into-1 header on an LS sound amazing. Yeah, we're going to do an 8-into-1 header test. The crossfire, you can unbolt the whole lid. Yeah, I know we've seen those before. We've played with those, or I've taken them apart, I should say. That would be nice. The crossfire, the other problem with the crossfire manifolds is that the openings in the manifolds themselves are really small. And they're not the whole length, they're not the whole height, basically, of a normal, even a normal like fuelie sized intake port on the head. Picked up a Hawaiian smoky unit for 4.3, which is a single blade intake. I was thinking that would be fun to throw on the 3.8 supercharger on. I have one of those smoky manifolds. I need to take a look at that and see if I can, because it has a removable lid, because they made it with different carburetor flanges, basically. So it has a removable lid on it. Do they make a small look Chevy intake manifold like the high ram for the LS? They don't make a high ram for the small block. They make one for other applications that we'll try it on, but they make the sniper ones, the fabricated ones. So we got 2 more minutes. 62% are saying yes, long tube headers make more power. If I send you one, we'll bolt an M90 to see if it makes more power. Are you talking about the crossfire manifold? We know that an M90 on a small block will make more power. It definitely will. Don't you think that the small block Chevy is better than the LS for boost due to the head bolts? No. Aren't short runner exhaust manifolds better for response? No. Long tube headers make more low speed power than short runners do. The lower crossfire intake. There was a crossfire intake at the local wrecking yard. I never grabbed it though. I probably should have. There might be a crossfire manifold at West Tech. Or are the OEM manifolds built into the head? They do it for cat light off. 17 is better than 10. It's not a matter of more. It's a matter of are you getting the clamping that you need? And obviously, from the results of the power outputs of these motors, the LS makes more power than the small block does. Certainly in any kind of a stock form. And so far, because the small block Ford only has 10 bolts also, that really hasn't been a limiting thing. And I know that was something that the guys way back when I was doing stuff for Turbo Magazine, a lot of the guys were throwing that around. Oh, small block's way better because it has more head bolts. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. But are the head bolts the reason that you'd be losing head gaskets? Usually that's something else. Yeah, Travis, that's a good point too, that the depth of the head bolt, the structure that it has to bolt to, versus the deck thickness of the small block that's another thing. Supercharge a small block for a few $100s. Winston, I could just put the blower on a carbureted manifold too. The problem with the small block Chevy and that blower will be the distributor. Is ease of construction of turbo headers easily makes up for long tube gains. That's why stock cast iron manifolds work okay. I don't really understand your question. Long runner at low RPM flows better because of the shallow radius. Well, the flow change is one thing, but long runners don't make more power at low RPM because of flow. They make more power at low RPM because of scavenging waves. And obviously on any of these, I think that trigger happy. I think your blow through thing. I think that's what you're talking about. I think you're talking about maybe remote mounting the blower, which we could do, but it's better if the blower is bolted in the, in the V of the manifold there. But on a small block Chevy with a rear mount distributor, that's going to be a problem the way that the entry comes into the blower. So in other words, short runner has higher manifold pressure off idle due to proximity and thermal retention. No, that's not what I said at all. Watched a video recently from Artec. They made a case for short exhaust runners to the turbo. Yeah, guys have made that, and they also have made I've also seen people talk about short runners for blower and turbo applications to get the air to the valve right away. So for response, but that's not how reflected waves and induction system and exhaust work. There's maybe a case to be made for shorter exhaust, but again, if we see if we see that a long tube header makes more low speed power, which is typically the case on an NA motor, if we see that and it's doing that when we put the turbo on, still, if it is, it will make more low speed power. It will have more boost response than a shorter distance for the exhaust to travel, because that's not the shorter distance for the exhaust to travel. If you look at the speed of the exhaust, you're the greater power production there will make more of a change in boost response than the distance will. Do I need a special distributor for a crank trigger? Yes, we normally use a flat crab cap for that stuff. I'll donate $100 if this can be proven. If what can be proven? That long tube headers make more power than short headers do? That's already been proven. It's already been proven thousands and thousands of times. We know that works. The question is whether or not it does that with a turbo. That I don't know yet. I mean, I don't have actual dyno data to validate that. And it might be better to do that on a turbo that's lacking a response. We know that it does it with forced induction. We know that it does it with a blower. Headers definitely have a tuning effect with a supercharger, but it doesn't do that. And intake runners definitely do that with forced induction. With any sort of pressurized air in the intake manifold, the reflected waves still operate the exact same way with runner length with regard to the induction system. So now the question is, are we seeing the same thing on the exhaust side? What is the best distance for a turbo mount? There isn't one. We see turbo applications working on remote mounts all the way at the back of the car, in the bed of the truck, all kinds of stuff. I don't do dyno tuning. I'm not a tuner. At what point is manifold length detrimental? That's another consideration. When I did the remote turbo thing, obviously having more distance in there is definitely going to can change response rate. I don't know how it can't. Both from two things that you're talking about. One is distance, so the time that the exhaust has to travel to get to the turbo from, like, let's say idle, then go snapping to wide open throttle. We have time for all of that stuff to fill up, time for the exhaust energy to travel there to get to the thing. And then also, because of that distance, you're losing heat, which is another thing that you need heat energy to make the turbo work. The hot exhaust gases have more energy and spool turbo more quickly. I thought this is why OEMs put the turbo so darn close to the heads these days. That it has nothing to do with, they get their response rate from something else. What the reason that they're putting things, the reason that they have small exhaust manifolds from OEM applications is packaging and cat light off is primarily the reason. They can make the power that they want without any problem, and they have such small turbos that response rate is pretty easy to do. So again, the shorter runners light off the turbo faster due to proximity and higher thermal retention. This has been covered. I think I'm either misunderstanding or there's a miscommunication. So the question isn't distance. The question is if the long tube header makes more low speed power. So let's say at 2000 RPM, a long tube header adds 15 foot-pounds of torque. If it makes 15 foot-pounds of torque more at 2000 RPM, it will have better turbo response. So the question now is, does it do that when we have a turbo on it? That's what we're talking about here. Who on the Dynapoles? Actually, I didn't do that yet. I need to. I have not officially done that. I so far I haven't seen anybody with a correct guess. $12,056. So, Adam, stop reading the dealer handbook and ask yourself this, like we just went over. If one combination makes more low speed power than the other, we know low speed power helps turbo response. So if long tube headers make more turbo response, if long tube headers make more low speed power than a short exhaust manifold does, we know that that will help turbo response. More torque helps turbo response. The question isn't that. We already know that that's the case. The question now is, when we put a turbo on a long tube header, does it still do that? Does it still have the scavenging effect to improve low speed power? And then if it does that help turbo response? Yeah, the thing that they're telling you is might not actually be factual, because the short distance is not why an OEM, or not the only reason or the major reason why an OEM turbo has good turbo response. It's because it's a very, very tiny turbo relative to the power output. You look at the sizing on a turbo and the fact that it comes on at 1800 RPM or wherever, that's turbo sizing. And also lots of really good tuning and stuff. Obviously, it's a good topic. We have a lot of enthusiastic discussions about it, which means that I need to test it. I just got to figure out what kind of thing to test it on. Maybe the trophy 4-cylinder might be good. One of the V6s or something. But on that note, it is time to go. I will see you guys all tomorrow.